Welcome everyone to MailFuzz TV. I am Peter, and today I'm going to be talking about the Twilight Zone Season 5, Episode 9. It's called Probe 7, Over and Out. So spoilers for the episode. Rod was very proud of the ending of this one last time when he was promoting the episode, and he was saying next time we're doing this story. He challenged Twilight Zone fans to guess the ending. And I'd forgotten he'd said all this. I wasn't thinking about this as I was watching it. But it came flooding back when the reveal came. You know, when the names of the two characters were said in full, very, very quickly. I remembered Rod saying that, and I went, oh, okay, you think you're pulling off a little Planet of the Apes-esque twist, I suppose I'll call it, without getting too specific. So, the premise of this episode is that an astronaut crashes on a planet, the only habitable planet that's close by, and wants help from base. He's communicating back with you know, I don't know if it's NASA, but whoever, and they're basically saying, no, we're about to go to war, and it's, you know, it's kind of making allusions of the Cold War. It's talking about nuclear war. It's talking about entire coasts being destroyed and things like that. The idea being that this astronaut might not have a world to go back to, right? But they definitely can't spare any ships to come and get him or help him. And the first half of the episode is very much about setting up that he has got a broken arm, he's got a broken rib, and he cannot fix the ship on his own. He's stranded here. The big reveal is that once he meets this other woman who seems to have also crash landed here, that eventually it turns out their names are Adam and Eve. So this is actually a prequel to Earth. This is Earth. I mean, we're in spoilers anyway, but I was trying to like not mention that he wasn't talking to Earth earlier, because he wasn't. He couldn't have been, because he's on Earth now. So this is a pre-Earth civilization with the first man and woman who are from different planets who are going to come together and start the human race, or continue some weird mixture of two other races that is the human race. Whatever. The point being is that that's the twist. And sadly, I don't think this was a very good episode. I think it struggles from just... its focus and its pacing are really, really lackluster, because the entire first half of the episode is almost entirely the character Adam. Because we only get his surname early on. We only find out his name's Cook. But it turns out he's Adam Cook. He spends the first half of the episode basically talking to base, talking to whoever's on the other end of the line, and it's just them delivering exposition at him. But it's very much the same thing over and over again, where he'll go to the comms and he'll say, hey, I've crash landed, I can't fix the ship myself, there's nothing else around, there's maybe a fruit tree, by the way it's an apple tree, just for reference later, just remember that. It does feel very repetitive for that first like half. Up until the ad break, it feels like there's not really any meaningful advancement, and I almost feel like you could have condensed it down quite a bit and had him meet the woman much, much earlier. You could have had him meet her before the ad break, or at the very least have that be the ad break. Instead, it breaks before then, and it just doesn't feel like that suspenseful. It doesn't feel very much like there's a lot of progression in the story. And I think the other problem is that some of the themes that it's dealing with at this point, because we don't know yet, obviously, in this part of the episode, that this is a secret Adam and Eve story. So at this point, a lot of the conversation, other than the fact that there's a war coming back on the home world, is that this astronaut is going to be lonely. And the guy even says on the comms, you know, even though we can't help you, you should still call as long as you can to help with loneliness. And all I could think about is that the very first episode of Twilight Zone did this better. The entire first episode of Twilight Zone was about an astronaut in space dealing with loneliness. It wasn't the exact same premise, obviously, but it dealt with those themes better. We've had these types of stories and these types of like stranded people who are struggling, or even later in season 1, we had the episode where it's like the prisoner on the planet who gets the robot and how much he needs that because he's so lonely. We've really dealt with these ideas before. Not only does it feel kind of repetitive and like nothing's really happening for the first half of the episode, the interesting themes that it kind of pokes at are stuff that we've already done quite a bit in Twilight Zone, and we've done better in Twilight Zone in ways that were entertaining the entire time. So it feels very lackluster early on because of that. Once you get to the woman, you get to that there's someone out there, and there's a bit of suspense. Some of the runtime is definitely taken up with him hearing a noise and going out to investigate and yelling out in the hope that someone's there who'll respond. And eventually, she hits him with a rock actually, but then she's hiding inside the cockpit of his ship, and he tries to speak calmly that he's not going to hurt anyone, and kind of encourages them to meet outside where they might feel safer, because he doesn't know it's a woman at this point. It's not until she comes out of a bush outside that he finally sees that it's a woman. Honestly, probably the most interested I got in the episode was their attempts at communication. I thought there was a couple times where he was like very unwisely like not helping himself with the communication. Like he does a thing where he tries to draw on the ground to explain who he is and that he came from somewhere else. But all he really does is a circle and a line, and I feel like, how is she going to get that? It was baffling, especially when she seems to then do the same thing to imply that she's also came in a ship that's crashed and she's on her own. They're both stranded here. Okay. But just simple little things where he tries to tell her that he's got food and that he can give her some food, and he says that, and he does eventually put his hand up to his mouth to sort of motion eating to explain, because she doesn't speak the same language, obviously. I did think it took him a long time to like add the visual element, because like she's not going to understand eating food just because you say it. So that was frustrating. That said, though, him trying to communicate with this woman is probably the most interesting thing that happens in the entire episode. But it does obviously have its quirks and its problems that I've brought up, and I would also add on to that like how quickly he says, oh, well, I can offer you some food and maybe some companionship. And I get that he's not necessarily meaning we're going to be a couple and start having kids or anything, but it does feel like he reaches that point in the conversation the first time he's ever spoken to her very, very quickly. So it feels like we're rushing through some of the ideas in a weird way, which is funny because it also feels very meandering for most of the episode. But you can tell the entire thing hinges on the reveal. The entire thing is hinging on the reveal where he's deciding to leave his ship and go towards where the vegetation is, where the fruit trees are, to hopefully survive. He doesn't know if they'll survive for long, but the woman's back now because she ran away before. Like when he picked up his weapon again, not to do anything with it, just to pick it up, and she freaked out and ran away. He has like a whole moment where he's like, okay, well, good luck. Yeah, and I think it's obviously there's an anti-war sentiment in here, right? And the idea that it seems like the war that's being described as the potential nuclear war that could have happened at some point had the Cold War become, heated, I guess. And I think that's what that moment's meant to sort of tie into, is the idea that she's instantly scared of him being a threat and being violent, and then him having this little contemplation of a moment of being like, yes, that's the problem with our breed. We're all the same. She's got a reason to fear me. So I think it's trying to make a point there, but for the most part, it's really hindering on the reveal, the twist. And it all just kind of comes down to when he's reiterating his name and he's like, I'm Cook, I'm Adam Cook. And then she's like, yes, I'm Norda, Eve Norda. And I'm like, oh, okay. And I did sort of a double take when they said their names like fully, and I went, wait a minute. Wait just a minute. I think I see what you're doing here. Yeah, the episode ends with her taking an apple off a tree and giving it to him, which again, you can, the whole Eve taking the apple and taking the forbidden fruit and all that. Not that anything in this episode implies that it's actually forbidden. There's just obviously a nice little connection to the story of the Garden of Eden. Okay, I want to just compare it a little bit to Planet of the Apes for a second. So I'm going to say spoilers for Planet of the Apes in case you somehow don't know the ending of Planet of the Apes. I'm just giving you warning now so I can make my comparisons here, because it's very clear that this was a seed of the idea that would kind of become it. You've got the idea of nuclear war. You've got the idea of the world ending. It's just in this case, it's another world, and then they're beginning anew on what would become Earth. But in Planet of the Apes, of course, the twist is that this was Earth all along and it's been destroyed by nuclear war. It's hard not to see the comparisons between these two stories, but in two ways. One, that nuclear wars destroyed the civilization the astronaut came from, and two, the twist that this was Earth all along. Right, those two elements are absolutely, you mix those two elements together a little bit, mush them up, and you've got Planet of the Apes. Aside from the ape part, obviously, that's obviously very, very different from anything in this episode. But those key elements, it was screaming at me. And of course, if you don't know this, Rod Serling, that goes on to write Planet of the Apes. He wrote the script for that movie. So clearly there's some seeds in here, there's some ideas that Rod is really into, and he does like a much bigger and better thing with it later on. I think for me, this kind of suffers from not having much of an actual story or narrative. Like, it has its ideas, it brings up its themes, and it has its ending, but I don't actually think there's much of an entertaining progression or story taking throughout the episode otherwise. So it's pretty reasonably rated on IMDb, and I suspect that is because people like the reveal. And I don't dislike the reveal, but it doesn't really matter to me if I don't really enjoy the rest of the episode. If the story wasn't compelling before it hits me with the twist, then it doesn't save it. It doesn't make me happy, especially the first half of the episode, which, like, even just by the ad break, I was already feeling this repetition of him talking to the computer or talking to the guy over the radio. He's got this perfect Skype call, even though he's light years away from wherever it is. Which, that's not a big deal. It's a science fiction story. I'll let the logistics of that slide, but it's just very much beating the same drum for a while throughout the first half of the episode. And I don't think anything in the second half really makes up for it. I don't think the astronaut coming out and trying to find someone is particularly compelling, in part because we've seen these types of beats done better before, like I said, in this show. So what it has new to bring to the table, which is basically its reveal, it's something that clearly Rod wanted to do, and clearly he had an affinity for it because he wanted to do it again later, and did do it again later in a much better way. This episode, as it is on its own, I think is actually mostly pretty dull and feels very confined. I thought they did a good job with the set for the ship. When he's outside the ship, it wasn't that same old UFO they've used a few times. It was more of a rocket-looking thing that they had sort of sticking into the ground. And I thought that looked quite good, right? But we do very much kind of just have him go back in there and talk to a phone over and over again. I love having like a safe base, like a safe hub, right? Where the rest of the world's dangerous and unknown, but he's somewhere safe that he can retreat to and hope that he's safe inside. I love those types of stories, but there's never really anything to make it feel like there's anything coming after him or whatever. He hears a noise at one point and he thinks there might be someone of some kind out there, but there's never any near misses where someone's tried to attack him, or it's genuinely quite scary for him, so he retreats back to the ship or anything like that. They don't do enough with it to make it feel like, oh, we're relieved when he gets back to the ship or anything like that. He just kind of goes around and looks a bit and goes back inside. So it feels like it's just not doing enough with its sort of beat to beat ideas, if you will. So there's that. I did enjoy some of the music. There was because obviously Twilight Zone often uses some of the same pieces of score through all of its episodes, and those are fun to hear when they pop up. This one had kind of a bizarrely. I'm talking about how lacking it was in actual suspense and stuff like that. But funnily enough, the music probably was the most suspenseful music that Twilight Zone's ever had. It has this kind of, I don't know if it's like some sort of like bells, or maybe some kind of like xylophone style instrument, maybe mixed with a piano or something. But it was doing kind of this, something you'd hear in a horror movie as he was looking for whoever was outside. So the music was putting in the work. The music was putting in the work to try and make it feel like a tense scene. I just don't think it actually achieved it in the episode. So yeah, so it's a weaker one for sure. But clearly some ideas are in here that are going to blossom into something down the line. But I can't say I recommend it that much on its own, sadly. So that is Probe 7 over and out. Next time on Twilight Zone, we have an episode called The Seventh is Made Up of Phantoms. And from what Rod said, he was talking about how like Native Americans and like the army are stuck in some kind of time loop, or they're sort of frozen in time or something. There was some sort of timey element. I'll read the description in IMDb and see if it sheds any further light on this. On June 25th, 1964, 3 Army National Guard soldiers on maneuvers near the Little Bighorn battle site find themselves unwittingly involved in Custer's last stand. So yeah, there's like a time travel element of them going back to this famous battle, which is great because it'll reveal how little I know about Custer. I've heard the name Custer. I've heard of General Custer, but I think it was General anyway. Don't know. Not something that's brought up a lot in the Scottish school system. I'll just say that. But yeah, I'm curious. We'll see how it goes. We've definitely had a lot of episodes where characters walk into the past and see something, so it feels like it may be retreading familiar ground again. But we'll see what they do with it. So let me know what you thought of this episode in the comments. Of course, you can like, subscribe, all that stuff helps me out a bunch if you do, and you can support everything over at patreon.com/MailFuzzTV. Which helps keeps all the shows coming. So thank you very much for joining me. I do appreciate it. Keep watching TV in the Twilight Zone.